kama sema. Hizi ni machines, hizi gadgets. Wakati mwingine unaipashia time kidogo. Na ndio unaipashia time kidogo. Wengine unafinya hivi, hata net yako iko chini, unafinya. Mpaka hata inachanganya. Uende uchange password. Kwa wengine uchange password ndio. Uende uchange password. Usiingie na same thing. Kama shida yako. Jana login 19 hours. Jana ulogin. Login kutumia nini? Si login. Ulilogin ikaingia. Ulogin aje. Tuliweka registration number yako. Si weki.
Yeah. Kuna link nimekutumia kwa email, angalia hiyo link alafu join tuone vile tunaanza. Nakuja tukuconnectia kidogo tu. Nakuja. Yes. Share your screen. Just to
jana hata class explain procedure yote ya kulogin kwa portal. Yes. Ulizo nataka kumaliza kazi. Kiasi tu. Ulizwa nataka kumaliza kazi. Kiasi tu. 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 Kiasi tu
Kidogo tu daktari nakuja. Kidogo tu. Na huku sioni. Na mimi niko kwa hii. Aha. Ni gani nimetuma? Gani nimetuma? Turn off baby. Tunawatumia tuliingia kutupi.
Yes. Ni the very link kama nyingine.
Nimewatumia hao ya YouTube.
Oh, ya YouTube.
Hebu share notes Dr. Domitila. Facilitate classes mbili atengo. Mtanimaliza bwana. Ndio ashajoin. Dr. Kenneth, you can start. You are live on air. Let me check how many students have joined. Nakutumia link join na simu. Nakutumia link join na simu so that you can check whatever they are joining from YouTube. Okay. Nakutumia link ya YouTube sasa. Jina nako kwa hii kitabu. Kibabii University eLearning second year 2024. Hapa ndio sijui. Dr. Domitila, I think if we can see your screen, just try to enlarge a bit and start off. Just unmute. Unmute.
Good morning, class, and welcome to our class this morning. We are meeting for the very first time today. I'll be taking you through this course. KUC 2140 is the course code. The course title is State, Society, and Development.
Yes. Uko sawa? Uko sawa? Kuna link nimekutumia na simu. Hebu fungua hiyo link nimekutumia na simu. Yes, we have seen you are sharing the course outcome. Yes, I'm seeing. I'm seeing from my side. Nimejani lakini kaya nifanye.
So we can proceed. So I wish to take you through the course outline. This is what we endeavor to cover in this course.
Natumia eLearning model.
So as I said, KUC is a common course for a quite number of students across the university. It is a common course which is offered in the university-wide by the Department of Social Sciences. And our office is located in ABB 109. So just in case you have a challenge, you have an inquiry to make, we are located there, ABB 109. I wish to take you through the purpose of the course. that the purpose of this course is to introduce you as a student to the social, political, and economic developments in Africa that have made Africa what it is today. And therefore, this is expected that this course will enable you as a student to appreciate Africa's past from the pre-colonial through colonial to the present times, and how the rest of the world has contributed towards its development. So this is very, very important to you as a learner, that you get to appreciate the developments that Africa has undertaken from her humble beginning to what it is today. Now, it's important to note that this course entails some bit of history, and that is why we are going to walk this journey together from pre-colonial through colonial to post-colonial period. Those are very key, three key important periods that you ought to know as we walk through this course. The pre-colonial period. When you talk about the pre-colonial period class, we mean the period before colonization, before the coming in of Europeans in Africa. Then when you talk about during the colonial period, we refer to this period when the Europeans entered Africa and colonized Africa, and thereby establishing colonial administration in Africa. And then the third last period refers to what we call the post-colonial period in Africa. And this is the period when the most of African countries had attained independence. Basically, after 1960, most of African countries had attained independence, with Kenya attaining its independence in 1963. And therefore, the post-colonial period is very, very important, and we have to walk through to what we are today. The course description, we endeavor to cover the following: nation and nation state, their foundations, government and concepts. We shall be looking at the objectives and practices of nationalism, classification of states, stratification and its impact on resource distribution, problems of power, influence of globalization and development of external trade as a factor in development. I'll be taking you through Millennium Development Goals, formerly known as MDGs. The Vision 2030, which we are almost approaching now, we are 2025. Then the last bit will be on devolved government in Kenya. Class, I wish now to take you through the course objectives. That by the end of this course, you as a student, you should be able to, one, should be able to analyze the pre-colonial African societies. Two, investigate the national state concept. Three, evaluate colonial impacts. Four, you ought to critique post-independence challenges. And number five, examine globalization role. The very last is assess devolved government in Kenya. We are going to draw our topics or the course content in the course description that I just shared. And the course content of the topics in this course will include the following: pre-colonial nation in Africa. Under this, we shall be able to look at the foundations, characteristics, and the role in development. Topic number two will be on the nation state in Africa. its origins, characteristics, and underdevelopment in Africa. I'll take you through the nation state in other parts of the world, that is in Britain, USA, Europe, foundations and role in development. I'll also take you through comparison between a nation and a nation state, which will form our topic number 4. Then topic number 5, I'll take you through development and underdevelopment era. Topic number 6, I'll take you through what you call nationalism, and the big question that we shall be asking ourselves is what went wrong in Africa after independence. Topic number 7 shall be looking at the failed states in Africa, and in particular we shall be looking at the case study of Somalia. Shall pick Somalia as a case study. Topic number 8, we shall be looking at the influence of globalization on development and external trade as a factor in development. Second last, I'll take you through Millennium Development Goals and Vision 2030. The last topic will be devolved government in Kenya. Our mode of delivery, I wish that we, of course, to let you know that this course will be taught purely through online. However, we shall be having what we call collaborative discussions and student presentations, and I want to lay emphasis on that I'll be giving you opportunity to make presentations. By the end of our lesson today, I'll be highlighting some of the topics that you will undertake, and so that you do some reading, and thereafter I'll give you some time to make your presentations. So it's important that we are very keen on what we are learning, because that will be part of the evaluation that I'm taking, and therefore I really value when we have students doing their presentations. Of course, we shall have assessments as part of evaluation in this course. We shall be having presentations that will make part of the cut mark out of 10, and then online cuts. We are going to have a series of cuts, and I want to reiterate here that we are going to have a number of online cuts, and these cuts will be done online every Wednesday from 5 to from 6 to 7. We shall be having, of course, we are going to have a series of communications with our class representatives, whether to have it from 5 or from 6, but I think 6 will be fine with all of us. So every Wednesday, starting next week from 6 to 7, you'll be having an online cut. And with that, we shall do an average, of course, at the end of the cuts or the semester. And accumulatively, this together with the presentations will add up to 30. That is out of 30. Then, of course, we shall have the main exams. I also hope that you know the grading scale, so I don't want to bother you so much on that. And then I wish to bring to your attention the following core references that I wish that you you will interact with in the course of this course. The first one I wish to bring to your attention as our course 2006, the History of Africa, Volume 1.
Just increase the font, zoom a bit.
As our course 2006, again, History of Africa, Volume 2. Kevin Shellington, 2005, A History of Africa. This is a revised edition by Macmillan. Then Walter Rodney, 2003, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. All of these references that I've just highlighted here are available in our library, and I want to request that all of us kindly visit the library, get these books and read. They'll be of great help to you as we journey together in this course. Further reading, I hope you'll be able to download my course outline from our LMS. Now, I'm the one who will be taking you through this course. My name is Dr. Wahungu Maasi. My contact is there. You can call me in case you have a challenge. My contact is 0729 378768. Just in case you need some consultation, I'm always around on Wednesdays, so after our classes you can walk in and meet, so you are most welcome. I wish that we proceed having looked at our course outline and what we endeavor to cover in this course. I wish to cover topic 1 today, but I think next week we shall be able to look at topic 2, 3, and 4, or maybe 2 and 3. So I wish to take you through the first topic, pre-colonial nation. Remember, in my introduction, I highlighted that for you to have a better understanding of this course, remember, we are going to look at the history of Africa from pre-colonial, colonial, and lastly, during the post-colonial period. For those ones who have just joined us and you are not historians, I wish to just repeat what I said in my introduction, that in this course we are going to walk through 3 very important eras in history. Call them eras or periods. There are 3. The first one is the pre-colonial period. When you talk about the pre-colonial period, class, we are referring to the period before the coming in of the Europeans. So we shall be interested to learn about Africa before the Europeans walked in and invaded our continent. How were the Africans organized? So we shall be interested to know the history. This is referred to as pre-colonial period. Then class, we have what we call the colonial period. This is the period when the Europeans had developed interest in Africa, came and occupied Africa, established their administrative structures, and thereby officially colonizing the continent. So during this period, Africans went through a lot, as it shall come out from our learning this course. But you see, thereafter, we had what you call the post-colonial period. And when you talk about the post-colonial period, it refers to the period when African countries, most of the African countries had attained independence. And this is the period beyond 1960s to date. We are interested to see what now happened in Africa after colonialism. Very important. But for our consumption today, class, may I take you through the very first era or period in history, the one we are referring to as the pre-colonial period. During this period, we used to have what we call the pre-colonial nations. Pre-colonial nations. So I want you to take note that from the very, very beginning, that when we talk about a pre-colonial nation, is not a nation that we know today, for example, Kenya. And in this introductory lesson or topic, the second and the third, you'll be able to understand that there is a distinct difference between a pre-colonial nation and a nation state. And therefore, I want to say here that the country Kenya that we know today is not the one we are referring to as pre-colonial nation. It is a nation state. Now, for the better understanding of this terminology here, pre-colonial nation, may I define the term pre-colonial nation? A nation in this case refers to a group of people who are bound together by one and the same language. They are practicing the same culture, and they have a common heritage. For example, they trace a common or a same ancestor. They trace a common origin. So that is the definition of the term nation or a pre-colonial nation. That these people, they share a common language, a similar language. They have a similar culture. Then they trace a common ancestor. Now, when you talk about sharing a common heritages or common values, these values are not inherited or borrowed. You know, we have some values, some cultures that are borrowed or or acquired because of constant interaction with the people. So, for example, if you are a Luo, I'm just giving an example. If you are a Luo and you're staying among the Bukusu people of Bungoma, there are some of the values that, because of the constant interaction with the Bukusu, you might borrow along the way. For example, traditional circumcision. If you later on practice that traditional circumcision, you don't now say that that one is inherited. No, that one is acquired, or we normally refer to it as borrowed. So class, when you talk about a pre-colonial nation, in simple terms, it's defined by three very important characteristics: the language, the similar culture, and tracing a common origin. So a very simple question that you ask yourself, whether now the current Kenya is a nation, is a pre-colonial nation or not, the answer is very simple. It is not a pre-colonial. The current nation, Kenya, that we know today is not the pre-colonial nation that we are defining or we are learning in our class or in our lesson today. Why? Look at a similar language, similar culture, tracing a common ancestor. Do we portray all these characteristics today in Kenya? And a very simple answer is no. So up to that point, class, I have taken you through the definition of the term pre-colonial nation. Somebody may ask that, so when we talk about a pre-colonial nation, does it mean that we did not have larger entities that existed, maybe, for example, in Africa, that portrayed all these three characteristics? And the question is, the answer is yes, we had larger entities that existed in Africa that portrayed the three elements that I've just talked about: the language, the culture, and common ancestry. A good example is the Swazi nation of Swaziland. This kingdom is a larger entity in Africa, but it portrayed the three, and still portrays the three, it portrayed the three elements that I've just mentioned: the language, the culture, and common ancestry. The Swana of Botswana, the Swazi of Swaziland, these two larger political entities are good examples of the larger entities that existed in pre-colonial Africa, but portrayed the three elements that defines what a pre-colonial nation is. It is important, therefore, class, that we also mention examples of pre-colonial nations that existed, let's say, for example, in our current Kenya today, in East Africa, and other parts of Africa. I've just mentioned of Swaziland, the Sotho of Lesotho. In, for example, the current Kenya today, we had such pre-colonial nations like the Ababukusu or the Abaluhya nation, the Luo nation, the Maasai nation, the Turkana nation, the Mijikenda nation. Name them. The ones I'm listing, the Agikuyu nation, these were the pre-colonial nations then, before the coming in of the Europeans. And somebody might ask, you have just listed them. What about of East Africa? You can mention the Khatumas of Sudan. You can mention the Wanyamwezi, the Wasukuma of Tanganyika or Tanzania. You can mention the Banyankole and of Uganda. Name them. The Bagishu. These were the pre-colonial nations that existed in Africa. Now, did they, for example, portray the definition that we have just given of a pre-colonial nation? And the answer is yes. We can give a good example of the Agikuyu. And just a brief history of the Agikuyu, how they came into being. Remember, the Agikuyu trace their ancestry from two very important people. Gikuyu the man and Mumbi the wife. They believe their god, Ngai, created these two important people. Gikuyu the man and Mumbi the woman. And the history reports that the two were blessed with 9 daughters, beautiful daughters. And when they grew up, Ngai, in his own making, who is God in this case, provided 9 men, whom then married the 9 daughters of Gikuyu and Mumbi, and gave birth to the generations we have today, the Agikuyu people. Now let's look at our definition again. Remember, for a pre-colonial nation to qualify, class, remember the language, remember the culture, remember common ancestry. I've just given a good example of the Gikuyu people. Do they, for example, 1, speak the language, common language? Yes, the Gikuyu language. 2, do they have a common ancestry? And the answer is yes, they trace a common ancestor, Mumbi and Gikuyu. Do they share common culture? Yes, they do. So do they qualify to be a pre-colonial nation? The answer is yes. For the Bukusu people, you know very well the stories of Mwambu and Sela, where Hakaba created the two, blessed them with the children. The Maasai too have their own history. Same with Mijikenda, same with the Turkana, same with the Luo, same with those others that you mentioned here. As long as they have the 3 characteristics: the language, the culture, the common ancestry. So up to this point, class, you should be able to, 1, define what a pre-colonial nation is. 2, you should be able to mention examples of the pre-colonial nations that existed, not just in Kenya, formerly Kenya, then East Africa and the other parts of Africa. Someone may ask, do we now have also other nations that existed, pre-colonial nations that maybe existed in other parts of the world that portrayed the very characteristics that we have just mentioned, the culture, the language, and common ancestry? And a quick answer is yes. Can we mention them? We can. And good examples of these nations that existed outside Africa include the nation of Israel and Germany. Do they have the characteristics that we have just mentioned? We can give a good example of Israel, composed of the Jews. Remember, the Jews, as it is highlighted in history and in the Bible, they trace a common ancestry. Remember, they called themselves the God-chosen one. So they claim a common ancestry with a common language and a culture of the Jewish people. The same with the Germans. And in this case, there is a special race whom, and when I talk about the special in quotes, the Aryans, according to Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler claims that the Aryans are very special people. And of course, that is the reason as to why he started the Second World War. Why? He wanted to eliminate other people who, for example, the Jews, remained for even up to today the cleverest people in the world. So the Aryans also portray the three characteristics. These are the Germans. The three characteristics that we just talked about. So did we have nations existing outside Africa continent? We have given examples of the Aryans and the Israelites, or in this case, the Jews. So class, I have taken you through three important aspects here that you ought to understand or to recall. I have taken you through one, the definition of the term pre-colonial nation. And when you talk about the pre-colonial nation, it refers to a group of people sharing a common language, a common ancestry, common culture. These cultures, these values ought not to be acquired or borrowed. They are supposed to be inherited. Number two, I have taken you through examples of pre-colonial nations in Africa. And I started with Kenya. I have started with the pre-colonial nations that existed in Kenya. I have mentioned the Somali, the Turkana, the James, the Babukusu, the Baluya, the Luo, name them. Those are good examples. We have also listed some of the larger entities that existed in Africa. We've named the Sotho of Lesotho, the Swazi of Swaziland. We have also listed some of the nations that existed outside Africa. Israel, and German. So I wish at this point, class, then, because we've been able to define, we've been able to give examples, and therefore what follows is the characteristics we have to now look at in detail, because we've been able to define and give examples. It suffices, students, that we also look at the characteristics of the pre-colonial nation, because are we able to define? Are we able to give examples? Now, are we able now to give the features of these pre-colonial nations? That is the point of interest at the moment.
Dr. Maso umemute.
Yeah, it was just I put a pause, MacD, but we are to proceed. Thank you so much. I now wish to take you through the characteristics of a pre-colonial nation, students. I want you to take heed of what we are going to learn, because this one forms the basis of what we are going to cover in our next topic next week. Because next week, I'll be taking you through what we call a nation state. And remember, the third topic will be to get the difference. We shall be able to give the difference between a nation and a nation state. But today we are doing a pre-colonial nation. So it is important that we get to know what and the characteristics of a nation are or were. Now, to begin with, class, I wish to say here that one of the features of a pre-colonial nation was that it was more or less identified by boundaries. The question is, did the boundaries exist in pre-colonial nation? Because remember, this is the time that we are saying the Europeans had not set foot in Africa. And the question that somebody may ask is, so we are saying the Europeans had not stepped in Africa during this period. And here we are talking of the boundaries existing. Yet, the Europeans are the ones who came and drew the physical boundaries that we know today. The answer is yes, the boundaries existed, but they were not clearly marked as they are today. So then, what is the evidence that proves that the pre-colonial nations had boundaries? Now, boundaries were marked in the following ways. Number one, the language. So language was a form of a boundary in pre-colonial nation. Remember, in our definition, we said that a nation, a pre-colonial nation, must have or must speak the same language. So how will you differentiate one nation to the other? And the answer is language. Pre-colonial nations had a similar language, and the language acted as a boundary. So, for example, when somebody was traveling and reaches a place where he or she meets people who are speaking a different language from his, then this particular person knows that he's about or he has already crossed the boundary. Why? Because in that particular nation, they were supposed to speak the same language. So if you are traveling and you reach a place where they are speaking a language which is different from yours, then automatically you know you have crossed the boundary. So language was one key thing that defined boundaries in pre-colonial nation. Number two aspect, we are still looking at the characteristic number one. Remember, we are talking about boundaries that existed in pre-colonial nations. But we are now looking at the aspects that marked these boundaries. We have just looked at number one, language. Number two is the mode of dressing. So remember, we said that culture is very important and it ought to be similar in that particular pre-colonial nation. So if you, for example, how did you, for example, know that you are about to cross the boundary or you have already crossed the boundary? Is that when you reached a place where these people are dressed in a different regalia from yours, then automatically you know you have crossed the boundary. Because in a pre-colonial nation, people dress in a common regalia. Give example of the Maasai, give example of the Mijikenda. Their dressing is common, is similar. The last aspect under boundaries class is body decoration. Look at the Turkana, how they decorate their bodies with the red oak, quite different from the Maasai, quite different from the Mijikenda. So these three aspects that I've just mentioned, if you are traveling and you reach a place where the people are speaking a different language, the mode of dressing is different, the body decoration is different, then automatically you know I want to cross or I have already crossed the boundary. So that is one aspect that marked boundaries. So did the boundaries exist in pre-colonial nation? And the answer is yes. And what are the aspects? The language, one, the body decoration, and the mode of dressing. The second aspect that I want us to look at is the leaders. These pre-colonial nations, and I want to say here that the pre-colonial nations existed in the following forms. One, some of them existed as kingdoms and others existed as chiefdoms. Kingdoms were ruled by kings or queens. Chiefdoms were ruled by chiefs. Pre-colonial nations existed in the following forms. One, as kingdoms, and two, as chiefdoms.
Are you sharing a skill or maybe just a theory?
Kingdoms were ruled by kings
Try to share.
or queens.
Yes.
Chiefdoms were ruled by chiefs.
I don't know. You are lost some.
Now, the second feature about the pre-colonial nation was that these people had leaders, either kings or queens or chiefs. It is important also to mention here that these leaders were not elected. They were not chosen, but they were born leaders. There were no elections. So that is the second aspect of the second feature about pre-colonial nations. They had leaders. These leaders were not elected, they were not chosen, but they were born leaders. And this means that leadership was hereditary. Hereditary. What does that one mean? That when the king, the queen, or the chief died, then the position of the queen or the king or the chief was inherited, was taken over by either their sons or their daughters, for the case of the kingdoms that were ruled by the queens. Now, since we have said that leaders in pre-colonial nations were born and not chosen or elected, it's important to look at the third feature, that in these pre-colonial nations we had very special clans. At times we call them royal clans that supplied or produced the queens, the chiefs of the kings. So you don't just say, I was born a king or a queen, so I should take over this kingdom or this chiefdom. No, 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 no. In pre-colonial nations, we had very, very special clans. Look at the Abawanga among the Abashese. There is that special clan among the Abawanga that produced the kings. So you don't just come up from any other clan and you claim to be a king. No, 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 no. That one wasn't accepted. So kings and queens and chiefs came from a royal clans that supplied these leaders. Now, it's also important to say here that in these kingdoms and chiefdoms, of course, I had said earlier on that these kingdoms and chiefdoms were ruled by either kings or queens or chiefs. Now, for those kingdoms that were ruled by the queens, a lady now, it means that when the queen died, the firstborn daughter took over the leadership or the mantle of queenship. In this case, where the queen dies and her firstborn daughter takes up the mantle of queenship, it is referred to as matrilineal. Matrilineal. Matrilineal type of leadership. It is matriarch. Yes, linked to the queen. The firstborn daughter takes up the mantle of leadership from the queen when she passes on. But in cases where the head of the leader of the kingdom or the chiefdom was a man, was a king, then the firstborn son takes up the mantle when the king dies. This form of leadership, then therefore class, is referred to as patriarchal or patrilineal. The king That one is called patrilineal. Matrilineal is when the daughter takes over after the queen. Patrilineal is when the son takes over after the king. A quick question can be asked. Did we have such kingdoms where the queen ruled, and when she passed on, the firstborn daughter took over? The answer is yes, and we can give a good examples of the Akaus of Ghana, the Bemenda of Cameroon, the Nubians of Sudan, and Ovambo of Namibia, among others. So leadership, as highlighted earlier on, in these pre-colonial nations was inherited. It was hereditary. The sons and daughters took over their parents when they died. And therefore, the best way of replacing or succeeding the leaders in pre-colonial nation was when these people died. That is when the mantle was now passed from the king or the queen to their son or to their daughters. The next feature class is that these pre-colonial nations were small entities. Small entities. They were not large. They were just made up of clans. So they were small entities. I've just mentioned of the Luo, the Gikuyu. They are not like the larger ones that we know today, the ones we refer to as tribes today. During the pre-colonial period, these pre-colonial nations were small entities. The next aspect class or feature of the pre-colonial nation is that leaders in these pre-colonial nations were everything. They had great powers. In fact, in some pre-colonial nations, they were referred to as demigods.
Can continue now.
Just slightly below God. And this meant that these people had great powers. They owned everything in the kingdom or in the chiefdom. These kings had powers over the people. They had powers over the resources. And this means that their decision was final. They were all-round leaders. This is to say, these leaders in the pre-colonial nations were religious leaders because they were seen as intermediaries. You could only offer sacrifices through these leaders. They presided over religious activities. Besides this, these leaders were political leaders. They were heads of the kingdoms. They were heads of the chiefdoms. And therefore they were heads of what? Heads of kingdoms. As if that is not enough, these people were the final judges. We can liken them to the heads of like the Supreme Courts today, the Chief Justice. These leaders in pre-colonial nations were final judges. king's decision was final. It could not be disputed. And that is why on this characteristic or on this feature, I started by saying that pre-colonial leaders or leaders in these pre-colonial nations were everything. They were religious leaders, they were political leaders, and they were the final judges. You could not dispute the king's or the queen's decision in that particular kingdom. The kings, the queens, and the chiefs used to offer sacrifices on behalf of the entire nation. And remember, I have said they were the heads of these political entities, the kingdoms and the chiefdoms. So they were everything. A story is told, and this is just for fun. A story is told that during the pre-colonial nation, for example, if it happened because the king used to, though he stayed in the palace, and we shall learn about that, he used to walk around the kingdom or the chiefdom. And a story is told of a king who, for example, passed around your home, and the king happened to lust, to admire after, to admire or to lust after your wife or to admire your wife. The best thing you could do was you don't question the king. The king doesn't have to ask permission. What you are supposed to do as a man or a husband to that wife was to escort your wife to the king's palace and you walk away. That is funny indeed. The king walks around your home, happens to lust after your wife, happens to admire your wife. The best thing you do, escort your wife to the king's palace and you walk away. That shows students that kings in pre-colonial nations were very, very powerful. And you see, just to show that kings or leaders in pre-colonial nations were very powerful, is that killing somebody or committing murder or killing somebody was not an issue. With the king's order that a certain person be killed, then be it. The people that worked under the king or the queen had to execute the what? The king's decision. So the king had powers over the lives of people. If he wants you killed, there and then, he has people to discharge or to execute his decision. That is how powerful these people were in pre-colonial nations. Another characteristic, students, is that the people in these pre-colonial nations, including the king or the leader, spoke the same language. We have already given examples of the Swazi and Lesotho, of Lesotho, Swazi of Swaziland. The kings, together with his subjects, that is the people. In this case, when you talk of the subjects, we are talking about the people of that particular pre-colonial nation. They used to speak the same language. That is why at some point, the leaders or the kings or the chiefs in this particular nations used to speak, communicate in parables. The reason as to why they communicated in parables was to exclude the foreigners. You know, at times they used just to call, for example, a baraza or a common meeting in the nation. Remember, one of the features that I mentioned about the pre-colonial nation was that these pre-colonial nations were small entities. And if the king wanted to communicate something very important, then a communication was done to the entire kingdom. Drums were beaten, horns were blown, that the king wants to communicate. Now, during such meetings, a foreigner, and when I talk about a foreigner in this case, was that a person from a different nation. For example, if the king among the Abawanga calls a meeting, a foreigner from the Luo land might come, especially those ones who live near or next to these kingdoms, will want to attend such a meeting. And in so doing, for the king to communicate to the people, give me a minute kindly.
Akasema hiyo itahitaji time, nikakaisika ku display hapa ndo kalikuwa na alafu hata sio kiambo kwa sababu tutoa screen nyingine tukaweka ikakuwa na shida, tukachukua ile keba hapa na screen tukaweka machine nyingine inafanya maybe some Monday. Monday na tutakuwa.
So we proceed.
What we need to organize the start. Sawa.
So I was saying, class, that for the king to communicate directly to his people, there was anticipation that perhaps foreigners could come and join the meeting. So the king, what he did was to speak in parables. And this one was to help now communicate the message to the people. And in the same way, do what? Communicate to his very people, so that while using the parables, the foreigners could not get the message that the king was passing on to his own people. So a common language was another aspect that identified these pre-colonial nations. As I said earlier on, there were no elections in pre-colonial nations. That is another feature. There were no elections. What happened was that the king only appointed, the king or the queen or the chief appointed the people to work with. And the king or the queen was at liberty to discontinue them or to disqualify them. So it was upon the king's decision to choose the people he wanted to work with. And this means that these people or these leaders that worked with the king were answerable to the king, and none of them attempted to contradict the king's decision. You do that, you are fired there and then. Another aspect is that the leaders in these pre-colonial nations carried, or they did the businesses of their kingdoms, of their chiefdoms, from a special place known as the palace. For the kings and the queens, they resided in the palace. For the chiefs in the chiefdoms, they operated from what we call the chief's kraal. This was a very special place where the king of the chiefs carried out their businesses. And therefore, the queens rested and carried out their businesses. Remember, the daily activities of the kingdom were now being commanded from that single place, the palace or the chief's kraal. This is where the king, for example, used to receive harvest from the people, what we are referring to as tributes. Because when you harvest within that particular pre-colonial nation, to show tribute, people used to take part of the harvest to the king. And it was now upon the king to receive these tributes and do what? And share with the less fortunate in the society. It is important also to note that people in these pre-colonial nations carried out economic activities. They accumulated wealth through what we call exploitation of natural resources. This included digging the land or cultivation of the land. They did hunting and gathering. They did fishing, collection of fruits, among other activities. So that is another characteristics that people in the pre-colonial nations accumulated wealth through exploitation of natural resources, which included cultivation of the land, hunting of wild animals, gathering of leaves and fruits and roots. They also did fishing. Remember, ownership of land and resources was communal. This means that they didn't have specific land for specific people. No, land and the resources were communally owned by people. So these people, besides farming, they also kept animals and they did business. The kind of business that was carried out, or the kind of trade that was carried out, was what we refer to as barter trade. We talk about barter trade, we refer to the exchange of goods for other goods. So for example, if you wanted to get sheep, you could still exchange with goats or even cows, or even with farm produce, wheat. They did millet, sorghum, cassava. Such agricultural produce were exchanged with even animals. So they did what we call barter trade. That is another characteristic. As I mentioned, these people, they spoke the same language, and the political entities were very, very small. Another very important aspect here to note is that these people working was universal. This meant that these people worked in farms in togetherness. So we didn't have that individual work that was done now. What happened was that people came together to work on different farms, and whatever that was collected then was shared among the people. Not like what we have today. I want you to note whatever we have said here, because when we shall be learning in our next lesson next week about the nation state, we shall, at the end of that topic again now, draw a comparison between a nation, a pre-colonial nation, and a nation state. And another aspect here, students, is that these people had what we call a closer bond. They were connected together. Remember, these are the people who shared a common language, a common culture, and they spoke the same language. And therefore, these people had a closer bond. Apart from this connectedness, also what connected them together was these people used to organize activities. that brought them together. The circumcision ceremonies, marriage ceremonies were done, and this brought these people together. They celebrated together. And this means that the people in the pre-colonial nations knew each other very well. Why? Because in such ceremonies or in such functions, people knew each other very, very well because they practiced together. Another aspect or another feature of the pre-colonial nation student is that these people practiced a common religion, which was a traditional religion. Some of them worshipped on the mountains, along the rivers, under certain trees, like for example the Mugumo tree, and they used to give sacrifices. We are being told that in some of these pre-colonial nations, they even sacrificed human beings. I don't know, and I cannot give examples, but we are told from history such pre-colonial nations existed. They practiced traditional religion, same religion. So, for example, the Luo had practiced the same religion. The Agikuyu practiced a common religion, which was traditional. Some of them, as I have highlighted, they worship on the mountains under certain and specific trees, others alongside the rivers. Another aspect that these nations have very important symbols. These symbols were referred to as totems, highly regarded symbols. For example, among the Luo, I'm told there is this big snake in the Lake Victoria known as Omiel. It is highly regarded, even up to date. Politicians, great politicians that we know, I'm told they usually go and pay homage to this particular snake. It has certain powers and it's highly regarded among the Luo. Look at the Abaluya. There is this animal known as Ingwe. Highly regarded among the Abaluya. These animals or these symbols were referred to as totems. So when you go back, may you ask your parents so that they tell you the totems in your particular clan. These people also had what we call taboos. When you talk about taboos, these are the don'ts, the do's and the don'ts in these pre-colonial nations. Just like today we have a constitution. In pre-colonial nations, we didn't have a written constitution, but we had what you call taboos. This dictated the do's and the don'ts in these kingdoms. So these were the rules, they dictated the rules and the regulations that were to be followed by the people. The second last is that, or the last one is that, I think it is the second last one, that these pre-colonial nations did not have what you call a standing army. Yes, they had soldiers or armies that protected the pre-colonial nations, especially when we had an impeding enemy to any pre-colonial nation. They used to sound a trumpet. They used to beat drums. They used to blow horns to alert the soldiers in the pre-colonial nation that there is an impeding enemy, so that they could now arise to the occasion and fight a common enemy. But we are insisting here that they did not have a standing army. So what does this mean? That these soldiers or these armies yes, they were recruited in these pre-colonial nations, but their work was not just to protect the nation forever, like what we have today. Today we can talk of a standing army. Like, for example, you can talk of the Kenya Air Force, the Kenya Army, the Kenya Navy. They are there to protect the nation. So these ones are there forever protecting the nation. So we can refer to them as a standing army. But in pre-colonial nations, we did not have such. But these soldiers existed. They were only informed in the nation that we had an impeding enemy, and they had now to protect the nation. Thereafter, after waging the war, and maybe the war was won, these people went back and joined the community to contribute the nation building until when next alerted. From these students, and from what we have learned, the very last one is that the kind of leadership, therefore, the kind of government that existed in pre-colonial nations, therefore, students, can be summed up as dictatorial kind of leadership. Why talk about dictatorship? Remember, in one of the feature that I've just talked about is that leaders in these pre-colonial nations were everything. They were final, dictated everything. They were religious leaders, political leaders, heads of courts, because their decision was final. This kind of leadership, therefore, or government, therefore, can be summed up as dictatorial kind of leadership. Students, up to this point, we have come to the conclusion of our lesson today. And in this lesson today, I've taken you through 3 or 4 very important things to note. One, the definition. I've taken you through the course outline. I have taken you through the first topic. Under the first topic, students, I've taken you through the definition of a pre-colonial nation. Up to this point, you should be able to define a pre-colonial nation. Give examples in Kenya, give examples in Africa, give examples outside Africa, the nations that existed. I have also labored to take you through what we refer to as the characteristics or the features of a pre-colonial nation. So before I give my last remark, allow me inquire something from our administrator here, so that we sum up our lesson. Please don't quit. I want to make the final remark here after engaging our administrator.
Daktari umemaliza? Nice. Nani? Let's kuchat tu. Let's kuchat hiyo link tumia kwa WhatsApp hiyo. Select kutoka kuchat yao. Previous nangoje tuone kama sio kama the material, at least you can follow the nimekuwa nikiona. Unless ngoje time activate Zoom. Bora yetu ni ya one way, ni kama TV. Ni kama TV. Ni kama TV. Sawa.
I was thinking I can give them a question and tell them give me 5 minutes.
Okay, so
Discuss the question.
After consultation, I wish to state here that our lesson has come to the end, but then I wish to communicate this to all of us, that we prepare an online CAT next week, starting on Wednesday, starting from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. I wish that classmates do that communication to our various WhatsApp walls. I want to appreciate the representatives that have added me to their wards, and I request that those ones who have not added me to their wall to do so, so that I can be able to do some communications in those different walls. So thank you so much. I've seen the communications. I've seen the chats, our various chats that we are doing. I'm able to follow. Thank you so much. I've seen the chats there. Thank you. Thank you so much. And notes will be there on our LMS. You should be able to access. Somebody saying Aki huyu Lake angeendelea kufunza, very interesting and understanding lecturer. Okay, thank you so much for your input. Bye for now as we prepare for the CAT next week. Goodbye.
Sasa hii problem mtaresolve ama itakuwa